when I became death. I didn't expect it to happen. I wasn't killed through something dramatic or horrendous. You could say my passing was quite anticlimactic. I had been sick on and off for a while, and I didn't take care of my health for some time. I knew I should care more, but I didn't. One day, just like any other, everything suddenly hurt. It was unbearable. I got up and went to grab my phone from the lounge room to call an ambulance. I picked it up, my hand shaking, and tried to call out for someone to hear me. I stumbled with it, dialing the emergency number, and dropped my phone before I could press start call. The worst possible timing. I felt so nauseous that I hunched over in pain, gripping my stomach and my chest. It was tight. I couldn't breathe anymore. I had been warned about it but didn't take it seriously. I gasped my final breath and fell loudly to the floor. Pain was my last memory. I wasn't in my body anymore. I sat looking at my body laying in an unnatural position on the floor. I looked strained, exhausted, and the pain-filled look in my eyes haunted me. I didn't move for a while and just stared at my lifeless body. There was no light to head toward, and nor did I see any reaper to take me to the afterlife. No heaven nor hell. I waited for days. Nobody living or dead came to find me or take me away. Was I forgotten? Did this mean I was going to become a ghost? What was going to happen to me? I watched the sunlight enter the room, then the night, and hoped I would be found soon. The thought of having insects crawl inside my body and devour me terrified me, as the idea of rotting in my house. My corpse started to leak fluids, and I knew I stank. Not that I had the sensation of smell anymore. I didn't want to look. I kept finding myself drawn to my dead body. A part of me hoped I would suddenly crawl back to life, and this was all a painful dream. I walked around my house trying to find something to do. My existence became aimless. Nothing had the same enjoyment that it did in life. All the books I would read, my phone that I would spend hours of my day on, all of it no longer mattered to me. I had no more cravings for rest. I no longer needed sleep. And while this was something I would have loved when I was alive, I wanted to rest and finally be at peace. Food had no taste, no joy, nothing that excited me anymore, depending on how long it would take for me to be found. The food in the house would also rot. The fruit pile would eventually go bad and attract fruit flies that always found a way in. I longed to feel part of the world again, both the good and the bad. The world looked strange through the dead's eyes. I walked to the window and stared outside. It was still sunny. A classical, beautiful day, and life continued to move forward despite my passing. It was oddly reassuring that life would go on if mine came to a sharp, sudden stop. I waited for days before a nosy neighbor came to speak to me. She usually needed help with some pointless task or another, or to try to pry into my business. I've never been so happy to see her. She tried knocking on the door, where I usually greeted her and would lose time out of my day. Then she walked from one window to another, using her hand to peek through and get a better view inside. She jumped and let out a cry of shock. She must have seen me, and I felt a burst of relief. I thought she was going to go get someone or report my death. Instead, she hurried back to her house, closed the door, and didn't leave. I called out to her from the window, asking her to come back and to tell somebody. At nighttime, she finally made her return, and there was no one with her. She held a bag and some tools. She occasionally paused and looked over her shoulder, careful that none of our other neighbors would see her. Why did she need the bag? I watched, unable to stop her, and she opened the side gate, then walked to the backyard, and I kicked myself for never locking the back door. She slid it open and closed it behind her, locking it. My heart sank when I realized what her goal was. She went over to look at my now rotting body, covered her nose, and knew there was no chance I was alive. She placed a handkerchief over her face, trying to keep the smell out, and I saw a smug look of satisfaction on her face. She looked at my phone. I think she was going to steal it, but thought better of it. The runoff from my body was leaking an outline around me. She went upstairs and walked around the different rooms until she found my bedroom. I never let her inside my house because she always tries to pry into my life. I kept following her around my home. I was screaming at her, telling her to get out of my house and stopped touching all of my things. My words fell on silent ears. She made a dismissive joke about my tastes and started to open the doors, looking for valuables she could steal. She rummaged around and didn't bother to put things back. Soon, books or pieces of clothing were left lying around behind her. I hated people being in my room at the best of times, but having someone do this, I despised her. I tried standing in front of her. I wanted to push her away, and for the briefest moment, she stopped dead in her tracks, shivered, and looked around with fear in her eyes. She called out asking if someone was there with her. It wasn't enough to stop her. Brave and selfish once more, she opened another drawer and lifted up some coins. Why would you even bother with some change? She kept going with her hunt for my valuable pieces of property. When her eyes lit up with greed at the sight of my jewelry box, I screeched loudly at her to stay away from it. She made no sign she was able to hear me, or if she did, she didn't care. She saw my grandmother's bracelet, a priceless heirloom that had been passed down from my mother and then to me. She lifted it up, placed it around her wrist and admired it. Eager for more loot, she opened the box up fully, the mirror reflecting her expression, and she saw me for the first time. I was a ghastly figure, my eyes in pieces where insect life had begun to feast, and before I could get a better look, she dropped the jewelry box on the ground, spilling the contents over the floor and breaking the glass. She screamed loudly, terrified, and her fear gave me the power I needed. I felt like I had feasted for the first time in years. Power rushed through my body. The furniture in the room shook violently. Some of the items managed to fall on the ground, and she tried to run away. The door slammed. Unfortunately, it didn't lock her inside with me, and she managed to escape. I was able to go through the closed door, and I followed her down the hallway. I didn't do it. My neighbor tripped and fell down the stairs. Her head bumped hard on the floor. It cracked and I saw blood leaking from her head. She wasn't dead. Not yet. I stood over her. I could see her breathing, and it was slowly becoming weaker with every breath. I lowered myself down on her. She was so close to death. I knew she could see me now. I could see my reflection in her terrified eyes, and I wasn't frightened or disturbed by it. I embraced death. My skin was green, pasty, and had the fluids drained. My hair was clumped in dried blood and liquid from my corpse. My eyes still had insects inside them. They wriggled and one dropped down on her face. She whimpered, unable to escape, and I leaned in close so our noses were barely touching.
"I'm looking forward to you staying with me forever,"
I whispered, my voice now strange to my ears. It was distorted, raspy, and I enjoyed it. I heard her breathe her final breath and hoped she too would appear. I didn't wish to be alone in my solitude anymore, even if I was bound to someone I despised. I wanted for more souls to join me and give me that rush I felt when she saw me for the first time. Her spirit form sat up and crawled backward away from me, screaming. She was crying, covering her face, and repeatedly asking what was happening to her. Did she die? She muffled apologies for stealing from me, and it was getting harder to understand her. The reality didn't sink in. Each time she spoke, it only grew more erratic. Now there are 2 corpses in my house. I tried to ignore her crying, even when the boredom sank in. Days passed, and still, our bodies were not retrieved. I regretted living a quiet life now, barely even speaking to my sister and other members of my family. My phone would occasionally light up and ring, until the battery finally drained completely. Outside, old newspapers were beginning to pile up, and the garden was unkempt with an overgrown lawn, weeds growing in the garden beds, and cobwebs in the windows. My car hadn't moved and there had been no signs of change, all signs of a lack of occupation. I watched as my neighbor's family tried to check on her. No doubt she didn't call or text them regularly anymore, like she normally did. The monotony of my life was replaced with a form of entertainment I thought I would never do. I spent my days tormenting my neighbor. A couple of days of being dead gave me an edge on her, or perhaps it was because it was my house. I'm not sure. I would appear out of nowhere to frighten her, lock her in cupboards so she would bang against the doors, wailing to get out and go back home, push her down the stairs or force her to look at her corpse. She was so sorry for trying to steal from me. The items didn't mean that much to me anymore. I cared more about the house itself. I was bound here, and every time I tried to leave, I was pushed straight back inside, unable to move forward or back. I needed to protect my territory. I don't think she quite understood that she was dead. Even when she saw her body, she never recognized it as her own. A concerned and more moral neighbor must have contacted the authorities about the house. Maybe she heard something. I don't know. I saw the police knocking on the front door, calling my name, and asking if they can come in to do a welfare check. They were peeking inside the windows, eventually seeing us, and tried to come in the locked back door. They broke in and called out to the empty home. And soon, they stood over the 2 dead bodies. I leaned on the wall, listening to the different police officers walk through, and see if there had been any sign of foul play. Since death was a frequent part of their day, it felt as though it was another day in the office. They chatted about what their kids were doing, what they were going to eat for lunch after this, and even some minor celebrity gossip. It was when they went upstairs and saw that items had been taken out that raised concerns for them. 2 of the officers went outside to call the coroner in order to take the bodies out of the house and begin their investigation. One of them went upstairs. Soon he too was looking around, and I could have sworn he managed to pocket some items too. Did anyone have any respect for the dead? I watched him and stood close. He shivered, goosebumps on his arms, and he must have sensed something. He stopped dead in his tracks, looked around the quiet room and couldn't feel me anymore. He brushed it off and went into the ensuite to do his business, which I wouldn't have minded. If you gotta go, you gotta go. However, he made no effort to remain tidy and peed over everything, the toilet seat and all over the floors. I wanted to try something different this time. I stood behind him and whispered threats into his ear. His body knew he was under threat before his mind was able to process it. I ran my ghostly fingers down his arms, that itched to be away from my touch, and I was about to strike him down when I heard a person call him from the door. A middle-aged man with graying sides, a bald patch, and a pot belly, looked 100% done with his occupation. He suspiciously looked at the rogue officer and at the room, then asked if he had taken or moved anything. The frightened cop shook his head. He was studied for a moment, and then told to go downstairs. The thief left the room. The newcomer lingered at the open door and around the room before murmuring sorry under his breath. I wasn't sure if he had a good nature, or if there was a chance he sensed me watching him. I kept following the officer that disrespected my home, ever his shadow, and waited for the chance he may slip up. The kind officer never left him alone. Perhaps he suspected my motives. He was the first and the last one to truly escape me. I always thought I would be bound to my remains. At least that's what all the legends said regarding the dead. However, I still lingered here, even when the coroner took both our bodies away for examination. The crime scene cleaners came to remove the blood and fluid with maggots squirming around inside it. They even had to remove the carpet because it couldn't be cleaned. My neighbor still wandered around. With her body gone, the last piece of sanity left her, and she would walk around the house sobbing when I wasn't tormenting her. I would see strangers stop and look at the house outside, listening to her antics, and hope that they would come inside. Wisely, they did not. After a couple of months, some of the local teenagers decided to pay us a visit. They came in and gawked at the faint outline where my neighbor's corpse had been, and then over to mine. The crime scene cleaners didn't manage to get it all. They made themselves at home on my furniture, got out their alcohol and other substances. If I was alive, I may have joined in with them. They hung out, got up to leave, and hadn't damaged anything when they heard my neighbor's loud wailing. Naturally, it scared them, and they ran out as quickly as they could. Because of her, the home gained the reputation for being haunted. It was a double-edged sword. On one hand, people would look at the house and rush to get away from it. And on the other, it acted as a beacon for people to come see what the fuss was all about. I heard them outside before I saw them. They were doing their YouTube introductions and talked about some of the stories concerning the house. Most made sense and were true. However, a few people added their own fictional ones in. That there had been a murder. Oh no, not yet. They looked around the house and set up their electronic equipment in the lounge room. They kept asking if anyone wanted to communicate with them, if anyone was here with them, and that I shouldn't be afraid. I had to make sure I didn't walk past anything to set it off. I didn't want them to have proof that ghosts actually existed. Each time I saw the camera in my direction, I would run and hide, only watching them from around a corner, and waited for them to leave. When the cameras were off, they talked about the uneasy feeling, but they didn't hear any of the wailing or see anything. I had been growing weaker lately. I knew I needed to attack and create another in order to feed myself. I regretted not doing anything when they left and more time passed. I was growing weaker. I looked down at my hands and they were becoming transparent. Was this the end? I didn't want to die or disappear, wherever I would end up going. A young couple broke in one night. They spoke about watching a video on it and seeing a face in the corner of the room. My face. I tried to be careful, and they still managed to see me. There was a young man with a cropped beard and half covered his face with a mask. She was a curvy redhead, her hair tied back, and both of them were dressed in black. It was harder for me to recognize people, yet there was something familiar about them. These two were better prepared than the others. They called out a familiar name. I think it was what I used to be called, and asked if I wanted to speak with them. I shook my head, not that they could see me, and it was when I noticed the redhead was looking directly at me. She reached out with her hand and told me I didn't need to be scared. It had the opposite effect. She told me she knew what happened, and I had every right to be angry, but it was time for me to move on from this place and find peace. I walked toward her, stood barely a meter away from her, and I could feel myself slowly turning into nothing. She kept telling me not to be frightened and go toward the light. I felt myself floating, rising upward, like inhaling and preparing yourself for release. I heard the wail down the hallway, and they jumped. The moment of concentration broken. The memories of how and what happened in the past were difficult to remember now. All I knew was I hated her. I wanted her to suffer. The hope lost, I returned to what I was. I let out a devilish screech, and my hands went around the redhead's neck, squeezing, and she screamed. I felt strong. I fed and felt alive once more. Her boyfriend threw something at me that burned my skin and nearly pushed me away. I kept going. I felt something move through my fingers, burning and twisting at them. It was only now that I realized. I managed to somehow push my fingers into her skull. Her boyfriend screamed at me, and it didn't take her long to die. With her passing, I gained more strength, and instantly went for him too. Arms outstretched, teeth bared, and I floated through the air at him. I didn't even need to touch him. The sight of me was enough to cause him to fall back behind, his corpse locked in a screaming defensive position, with his hands up in the air in an attempt to protect himself. His ghost always remained scared of me, and rarely showed himself to anyone, living or dead. His girlfriend often tries to reach out to him, or anyone else who enters the house, trying to warn them to stay away, or that it's best for them to leave. She is the most aware out of all of us. She remembers her life before, and what was lost, yet even finding a feeling of peace in death. She surprisingly held no grudge over what happened. My hands changed. They were skeletal, and coated in a thick, tar-like substance. I'm guessing years had passed. All the houses in the neighborhoods had new families in them. They changed, as did the gardens outside, and my house remained the same, falling into disrepair. The tires of my car had burst or had been stolen. This time, the corpses of the couple had not yet been found. We would all become more active at night, looking through windows or making sounds. The house gained a reputation for not only being haunted, but a dangerous place to be. And it was. The redhead would pinch or encourage people to leave the house, warning them of my presence. Even in death, I still retained the ability to hurt her. And one time, the distraction was enough for me to trap one of the rogue children in the kitchen. He tried to hide under the sink, wedged in between the moldy potatoes and the old cleaning products. He wept, arms wrapped around his body, and his friends ran from the house, leaving him to his fate, and nor did they tell anyone about it either. I drained him of life, leaving a tiny husk of what he once was, and soon he would haunt the cupboards, never leaving the place he felt safe. I didn't need to feed as often. The next one was a homeless man who came in to seek refuge from the weather. I was content with him being there for a while, until he started lifting books to burn on a makeshift fire to heat the house. Furious, he damaged property that didn't belong to him. I began my hunt. He heard the redhead's warning, finally, and made a run toward the back door. I heard him muttering something under his breath, pleading, and he died close to it. I was sure it was still locked. I looked at it. This was important to me for some reason, and it made me remember pieces of my old life, my human life rather than this existence. Most of the ghosts spent their undead lives in isolation, trying to avoid each other. Even the redhead no longer tried to speak to her boyfriend, and instead tried to let him be in his misery. As the years went on, her sanity hindered her, and her memories faded. She knew something was wrong, and she loved someone, but couldn't remember who it was. People would come to the house and get photos outside to prove they had been there. The outside was littered with graffiti now, and occasionally, kids from the outside would throw rocks at the house, breaking windows. They would even run up and touch the doors or the windows. There was even a game where people would run around to tap all the windows downstairs, and then throw a pebble at each of the upstairs windows. If you managed to do each of them, it was said to be a sign of good luck. The front and backyards became more dilapidated. All humans now looked the same to me. All of them were intruders who needed to leave. All except two. Over the years, there were two visitors that came to the house that I remembered. My sister sat outside in her car. She was older, elderly, and had been crying for some time. Her eyes were sunken in and purple from her grief. Her hair was grey now, and she needed to walk with a cane to help her. She sat on the doorstep, missing the remains, and looked around at the state of the house from the outside. She apologized for not coming sooner to clean and pack things away. She couldn't deal with facing the fact I wasn't with her anymore. Why didn't we bother to keep in touch more? And why didn't we make an effort to keep each other in our lives? Any issue we had could have been so easily resolved. She told me of her fears for the future, the rumors she heard about this house, and she wondered whether she could have done something to prevent it. I couldn't even remember her name. She told me this will probably be the last time she can come to the house. I wanted to kill her, but not out of anger, so we could be together forever. Somehow we would remember each other's names, but instead, I let her walk off the property. I wished she would come back, and had the feeling she would soon die, and travel wherever the dead are supposed to go. She took one final look at the house, whispered something I couldn't understand, and drove away. I was left wandering around the house, ignoring the other ghosts and their own personal hells. I wished I wasn't simply confined to the boundaries of the house. The second visitor was the same officer who apologized, not long after I passed away. He came with a priest in tow, and instantly I felt a feeling of dread. The priest checked the house, and I forced the other ghosts to be quiet around him. I didn't want his attention on us. He didn't say a word as he moved from room to room, taking a moment to investigate. And he didn't react when he saw the skeletons on the floor. A man who was used to walking with death and demons. His heavily lined face frowned and otherwise showed no emotion, no fear. No doubt he had seen death many times previously, or had delved into some dangerous locations. He whispered something to the now elderly police officer and left. The officer didn't linger and looked inside before he too left. They came back with other people, and I found that I couldn't attack them. Instead, I hid in the highest crawl spaces, and I could still hear what they were saying. They said I was a malicious spirit. What was wrong with defending my home? Wouldn't they do the same if they were in the same position? Each of the ghosts was dealt with. One by one, they moved on through force, or happy willingness to leave their personal hell. I didn't like any of them, but loathed the idea of being alone. I stayed hidden. I could sense them moving through the house, going room to room, checking and cleansing just in case I still lingered there. I struggled to remain in those places and had to flee. They came up into the crawl space, where I hid in a hidden section that the smoke could not reach, and managed to remain. The priest said he believed the house was clear, but there was something that lingered. He wasn't wrong. The police were called for the bodies. The house had become even more infamous. The police officer and the priest were both taken in for questioning about the event. I watched, quietly, while they removed the bodies, and felt so lonely. I couldn't be left alone. None of them were willing to be left alone. I needed to grab one of them. Soon they finished their work and left the crime scene. The old tape fell apart as time went on. There were no crime scene cleaners who came to tend to the remains this time. The house was simply abandoned, left to decay and time. I'm not sure how long I was alone for. A group of teenagers came inside and gasped at the old corpse stains, taking videos and photos of it, proof they had visited my home. They lit candles surrounding them, the only light in the dark room, and pulled out an Ouija board. They set up cameras to record their encounters, and at this point, I didn't care. I needed their energy. I couldn't walk anymore. I would grip and slide from one wall to another. In the mirror, I saw my appearance for the first time. I no longer resembled the human I used to be. I was a black, shape-shifting mist, in a vaguely humanoid shape, with two glowing amber eyes staring out. I stood looking at myself, and there were calls of, "Is anyone here?" or "Does anyone want to communicate with us?" I floated above them, looking down at the 4 teenagers and their equipment. The candlelight flickered when I moved past, and I rested a finger on their planchette. I moved it to yes. They gasped and whispered among themselves. Humans were so strange. I no longer felt any connection to the living. Their lives meant nothing to me. "Who are you?" they asked, in between checking the cameras to make sure they were recording. I moved it to the following letters: F-R-I-E-N-D, friend. Next they asked if I was one of the good spirits from the house. I moved it to yes. They seemed to relax now and started to ask pointless questions. Sometimes I would humor them by answering. None of them realized the danger they were in, and I wondered why none of them questioned why no one else was in the house. They let down their guard. Finally, one of them, perhaps the boldest and the most foolish, asked, "Do you want to come home with us?" I loved my home, the place I would always defend. However, this offer was so incredibly tempting. I moved the planchette to yes. They looked at each other and started to talk amongst themselves, that it wasn't right to leave a good spirit here, that they should be more careful, and they hadn't seen any sign of the evil creature that lived here. Me. I knew they were talking about me. The one logical friend said not to invite me in, or to come with them. I spelled out N-E-E-D, need, T-O-2, T-R-A-V-E-L, travel, I-N-S-I-D-E, inside, A-P-E-R-S-O-N, person. Again, they looked at each other, and this time 2 of them said it was a terrible idea, that a spirit shouldn't be able to go inside your body. They bickered between themselves for a good while. Floating above, I watched them and got a better look at them. Their fashion was vastly different. I couldn't understand some of the words they used, and their mannerisms. Finally, it was 3 against 1. She told them she had a good feeling about this, and we had a connection. I want to. You may enter my body and travel with me. I gave you permission to do so. It was now one of them looked up and saw me. I dropped down, entered through her mouth and nose. The candles flickered out. The room was pitch black. Instantly I took over her body, and it felt strange to be inside someone for the first time. I felt my hands around my fingers over my skin, feeling it for the first time. The body I was in was young and healthy. I can live the life I should have lived and grin. I had the memories of my host. She screamed at me to give control of her body back, and I told her it was mine. I was asked if I was okay, and I told them that I was fine. A flashlight lit up in the room in pieces, and I laughed. I told them I had faked the whole thing, and it was all an elaborate prank. They smacked my arm and told me I had really freaked them out, all except one girl who looked at me suspiciously. She didn't say anything at the time. We went to leave and I struggled at the door to leave. The outside looked so different. All the houses I knew were gone, and the buildings were in stark, blocky shapes. The neighborhood wasn't one I recognized. The cars were expensive with far more gadgets than I remembered, and clearly it had been gentrified over a long period of time. It had been nearly 100 years, perhaps more. So much time had passed. I took a step out the front door. I was free. I could go anywhere and do anything I wanted. The feeling of being thrown back was no longer there. We walked toward the car, and once I was on the footpath, it was difficult to contain my feelings. A whole new hunting ground had opened up for me. When I was dropped off at my host's house, I made idle chit-chat with my new parents, and the mum looked at me strangely for a moment and told me I should be in bed. I made my way up to my bedroom as soon as possible. I nearly fell up the stairs with my enthusiasm. I showered. All the sensations felt incredible, and I slept in bed. And while I no longer had the cravings of the living, it was pleasant to live it out. I got changed for bed and curled up in the warm blankets. I couldn't sleep though. Something was missing, and no matter how much I tried to rest, I couldn't. I had to do it. Around my fingers, I could see the black mist that typically surrounded my ghostly form. I had to kill. I went down to the kitchen, pulled out a butcher's knife, and walked back up the stairs. Her parents were sleeping in bed. I could hear them snoring, and inside my head, she was screaming and pleading with me not to kill them. I approached the bed and watched them sleeping so peacefully. I stabbed the mum first, and this time, killing felt so different, having to push the blade through blood and tissue. I could feel the hot blood on my face, torso and arms, causing my nightgown to cling to me. I took one life, and I could feel her spirit around me, confused, scared, and broken, like they always were. She pleaded with me not to kill her husband. I moved to my host's father. He must have taken something to help him sleep, because he didn't wake up, and I drove the knife into his chest. He woke with a grunt, grabbed me and shoved me roughly aside, the betrayal in his eyes as he thought it was his daughter doing this to him. The violence only encouraged me. I slashed and stabbed him repeatedly until his spirit too appeared. Husband and wife consoled each other, and I told them that yes, they were dead. It was only now they recognized I wasn't their beloved daughter. They screeched at me, demanding to know who I was and why I possessed her. They knew the answer, even as they kept pressuring me to speak. Finally, they asked who I was, and I answered with a single word: death. I hope you enjoy this story. What did you think of it? Let me know what you thought in the comments section down below. Don't forget to stab the like button, subscribe, hit the bell and leave a comment. This video is made with the support of my incredible channel members, Patreon subscribers, and all my viewers. Thank you so much for supporting me. Don't forget to check out my social media accounts below, including my merch. Stay safe, my little spooklings. And remember, I'll be watching you.